Muy buenas tardes a todos. Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Estamos haciendo una pequeña prueba de sonido. Vale.
multitudinarios en los que vamos a estar. Como entiendo que ya sabrán, viene don Jeff Barr. So I will start to talk this part in English, okay? I think that everybody could speak it. So I am so glad and proud. I'm proud to be here this afternoon in this meetup. We have been, the three of us, or at the beginning, both of us, trying to talk about AWS when we were a long time ago a small company, a startup. So we were believers or monks of cloud, I think. So that's from my point of view. I just want to share this with you. I am so happy to have you here this afternoon. Thanks for your effort. But the beautiful thing, for me at least, to have Jeff here is that when I was starting my first job, like an intern in my company, in our small startup, I didn't know anything about cloud. I was just, I was learning economics, so I didn't know any fucking word about cloud, no? Anything about data center either. So one thing, as responsible of marketing and development of business, at the beginning just with AWS, one of my stupid ideas was, okay, let's find who could talk about cloud. And that day, or in those months, that moment of my life, I met Jeff Barr by Twitter. So it was a big help for me to understand the business, have the opportunity to read one of the first writers about cloud. So I think that he doesn't need any kind of introduction. So that is that. Today I am so happy to be here. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your effort to be here. So I will shut my mouth. Please feel free to have questions, comments, share knowledge. We are here for this. This is the day, this is the moment. We have one of the experts of the world. So my colleagues will help me with the smart questions. So please, please, please enjoy this evening. So that is all that I can say.
Para continuar un poco la introducción de Oscar. Oscar está muy emocionado de tener allá aquí. Yo voy a cambiar en inglés. Agradeceros a todos por venir. Hay muchos que están desde que empezamos en el 2015, muchas caras que cuando éramos 4 en un sótano, porque fue básicamente eso. Y la verdad que lo empezamos para poder hacer la idea de lo que era Amazon Web Services y lo que era el cloud. Para mí personalmente, todo este movimiento fue un cambio de vida. Yo me vine a Argentina, gracias a que empezamos a trabajar con Amazon Web Services en Argentina hace 10 años. Le estaba contando a Jeff que tengo una anécdota de cuando hicimos nuestra primera migración a Argentina. Amazon no tenía ni siquiera un equipo para traducir el caso de éxito en inglés y nos pedían ayuda. Y ver cómo esto cambia, cómo esto evoluciona, cómo ya tanta gente está interesada en acá es muy emocionante. Now I will switch to English. Oscar is very, very proud of having Jeff here. He's going to get
Not
very
so much.
emotional. Also, I wanted to take the opportunity because we started this together, but now Oscar and Christian are taking the lead, so I wanted to do the official handover to them about for the meetup. The meetup is for the community. It's not for any companies in special, so we try to do this since we started with the meetup. The idea was to share in the way that things get shared now. 20 years ago in the Linux user group, you could use mailing lists. Now nobody follows that, so we have to adapt to the times. I would really like to thank Christian for taking the lead, Oscar for taking the lead, and Jeff for being here. So let's start.
All right.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks Jeff for being here with us tonight, and thanks for taking the time. We know that you don't come alone, so we enjoy that you are here with us. So I think that many of you know who Jeff Barr is, but I would like you to give you the opportunity to present to the Madrid audience who you are and what do you do at
Wow.
AWS.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the hard work it takes, I know, to set up and event like this. I really love user groups and meetups because as far as I can tell, people always come to meetups like this because they want to. Did anybody's manager or boss say you must come to your meetup? No one? Okay, awesome. That proves my theory. Maybe. Okay. So way back in 1976, anybody here else alive in 1976? Oh, scary. Okay, very scary. So in 1976, I was 16 years old, and this was the time of the very first personal computer. This was the time of, if you remember, the Altair personal computer, which was really the one that started everything. And I was living in Seattle at the time, and I got invited to it was called the Northwest Computer Club. It was a meetup kind of like this. A bunch of people that said, here's something new and interesting that we want to get together, we want to learn, we want to share what we've learned, we want to learn from each other, we're going to invite speakers. So I was barely 16 years old, but I just kind of thought this was a pretty cool thing to go to, and I went to that very first meetup, and a lot of the people that turned out to have a strong influence in the later days of personal computing that ended up working at Microsoft and other early PC companies were also at those original club meetups. And fortunately for me, I met this one friend. His name was Steve, and Steve's actually still my friend today. He was actually hired to work at the first personal computer store in Seattle. And so Steve, we were good friends, and he actually was really nice because he would give me, this was before I had a driver's license, so he would give me rides home after these club meetings. Wow. And he got hired to run this first store, and he said, Jeff, I know you're really kind of eager to learn more about this technology, and we kind of take for granted now that it's very easy we always have access to a computer, right? We've got a great computer in our pockets, they're everywhere. That wasn't really the case if you're a teenager in 1976. It was much, much more difficult to get any kind of access. So Steve said, okay, Jeff, you come on board, and you can basically be the store janitor. And you can pretend to be the janitor, and you're responsible for keeping the store clean, but it's really an excuse just for me to have access to these computers. Well, my responsibility, I didn't have a mop or a broom or anything like that. My biggest responsibility was, we're in this brand new technology field, so there's all these brand new books and magazines and all this really cool information being shared. So my job was just open it up and put it on the shelves. And as you're kind of cutting open the boxes in this brand new magazine with all this really cool info, you can't really help but just kind of read it and just understand what's up. And so I would just make a practice of just making sure I just knew everything about every new product and technology that we had available to us in the store. And as a result, customers would walk in, and there were a few kind of older people that were the official salespeople, but they hadn't put the energy in that I had to actually studying our products. So naturally, customers would come to me, and even though I was just a little kid, they were like, okay, I actually knew what I was talking about. And they'd say, does it do this, and does it do that? And I say, well, yep, here's how it works. And I would do my absolute best to simply explain things. I never thought I was like a salesperson or marketing. I just really enjoyed absorbing technology and explaining it. And 40 years later, I'm still doing the same job. So that was kind of the beginning. Okay. That's kind of how I got started.
So how did you end up working in AWS?
All right, so let's see. So I spent some time working at Microsoft. So I was at Microsoft for about 3 years. And if you remember think back to 1998, 2000. So at least some of you were alive back at that time, right? Okay. All right, so think back to that time. So these were the really early days of web services. If you think to the early days of web services, it was ridiculously complicated. We had things like WSDL and Corba and SOAP, these ridiculously messy, very, very difficult technologies to just simply do what we now think of as a very simple thing, to have one computer that's the client, one is the server, some internet in between. In those early days, making that work was just really, really, really difficult. So you'd spend so much time on the config files and the clients and the servers and the ports and the networking and the sockets. It was really hard to actually have any demo that would really show the value of a web service. You could do maybe the stock quote or weather or a currency conversion. And we as technologists, we could really appreciate what that was doing and why it was difficult. But you'd show it to a business person. You say, it's going from here and across the wire to over here, and they're like, this isn't very impressive. I don't understand why you're so excited about this. So back around 2000, 2001, very difficult to actually convey the value of what was special about web services and APIs. Must have been early 2002, Amazon introduced the first Amazon API. This was programmatic access to the Amazon product catalog, and I saw this and I was immediately taken by the fact that this was actually a useful API. Instead of something kind of simple and just a demo, you could make one call and you could get this very, very rich schema of data from the Amazon product catalog. So I said, wow, this is an actual useful API. It's useful to the consumer because the consumer can take this data, they can do useful things with it. But it was also useful to the provider, in this case to Amazon, because Amazon could actually derive value from all this traffic coming back. Yeah. So I saw this, and I was consulting in web services at the time, and through some email introductions and connections and just kind of being lucky and being in the right place at the right time, I ended up working on an Amazon team and being able to work with web services. So that kind of got me on board. Now, I came on board not as an evangelist, though. I came on board as a developer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's nice. What were you developing?
Well, this is really embarrassing, but I was for the third time in my life, I relearned how to write Perl, and I was actually writing scripts and reports for the Amazon affiliate program. So I was doing that, but I had this great manager who said, well, here's your main job, but he said, we've got this brand new web services project. Yeah. He said, kind of just help them out a little bit. Do whatever it is that you'd like to do to help. So I did things like writing some demo programs and adding some capabilities to the web services. Oh, cool. And then one day they came and they said, well, we have this conference coming up, and we don't want to go to the conference, so we're kind of forcing you to go. And I said, oh, I'm actually happy to do that. That's not a punishment. I love to go out and speak at conferences. So that was kind of the beginning of me just getting up and speaking. I'd done it before in other jobs, but it was kind of the first time I got to do it for Amazon.
But that was before AWS, or?
Okay, so here's where things get a little bit messy and confusing. So before we had AWS, the infrastructure services, we did have AWS, the product information service, which it was kind of confusing because it was also called AWS, and the same group forward to do the infrastructure services, but it was only when Andy Jassy came from, Andy had been Jeff Bezos' tech assistant for a while, and then the company saw the value from that very first e-commerce service. The amazing thing is we put that e-commerce service out, developers found out about it very, very quickly. 24, 48 hours after that service was out, developers had located it, signed up, downloaded the SDK, built things, and started sharing them. So this was the first really important kind of a light bulb moment, if you will, where this was the e-commerce service, the product catalog. Okay. So as soon as Amazon put out that service, 48 hours later, there's some really cool things developers are already building. So that was the first really important customer feedback that said there's value in putting out APIs for developers. So once that was understood, they started to say, well, what else could we do for developers? And that's when we started to get together. We did some brainstorming. We got together with Jeff Bezos, and we said, let's just think of all the different kinds of things developers would need. Storage, networking, databases, compute power. And from that, Andy Jassy came on board the team. Now, at Amazon, we have this process where we write a document called a narrative, where the narrative is a 6-page document that says, I want to build a business, and here's the business case for doing so. So I was lucky enough to work with Andy directly on, as he wrote that narrative, and got to give him feedback and ideas and thoughts on that.
Oh, cool. So today I read a blog post from Werner, where he was talking about the transformation that Amazon came when they were building AWS. Were you part of that transformation? How was
so I actually haven't had a chance to read his post, so maybe tell me a little bit more about that.
He was talking about the journey that Amazon had from going from a monolith architecture to a microservice architecture, the two-pizza team, getting developers to release code by themselves. So I was wondering if you were part of that, or
that was happening at the very beginning. So when I was there, when you joined Amazon as a developer, the first thing you would do when you set up your developer machine, you had to actually the entire, basically the retail application, the website, was this one gigantic application called, it's called Obidos. And if you go back to your really, really old Amazon links, there'll be an Obidos. And that was, I don't even know what it stands for, but that was the application. And as a brand new developer, your first job was to set up your development machine, get all the code, and get Obidos to compile and link. And for some reason, it was like always a 2-week ordeal to get all of this stuff to actually work together. And then you'd make the smallest code change and you rebuild, and it was hours and hours and hours of compile and link before you could actually test your local changes. So there was a recognition that said, we're at the limits of technology. We can't buy bigger machines. We can't buy faster machines. Our innovation is just too slow because the innovation isn't running at people speed. We're stuck waiting for all these compiles to actually happen. So at some point, people realized, like, let's take this big block of code and just break it up into a bunch of pieces and then let all these different teams really proceed at their own rate. Now, one amazing thing I've seen a lot at Amazon that not every tech team is good at doing is we have something that works totally fine. We're okay with actually destroying it and building a better one. Now, in a lot of companies, you have something that works, and everyone's like, no, don't it. Please. The Amazon thinking is always, whatever that is, we're going to need a better one pretty soon. So we might as well break it now before it becomes a crisis. Now, this is especially true with, if you think of a service like EC2 or S3 or DynamoDB, these services grow at just amazing rates. You look at DynamoDB and it's processing trillions of requests per day. We really can't control the rate overall at which these services grow. Our customers simply choose to use these services. We have to make sure that we're scaling and continuing to enhance the architectures really ahead of the customer speed. So we can't wait for it to break and then say, okay, everybody stop using this for a month while we build it better. You have to be way ahead of the curve of what your customers are doing. So it's a really challenging thing. And when you talk to the engineering teams, they will quite often say, well, we're here, we're engineering for this level next, but we already have plans for like the next 2 orders of magnitude past that. And you have to think way into the future when you're building web services to stay ahead of the curve with your customers.
Awesome. And how did the blog idea start? Because you haven't said that before, but you were the first person that wrote the first blog, right?
Sure,
so
okay.
How did that start?
All right, so I did also, before I even joined Amazon, I had a lot of history with blogs and with syndication. I actually had this personal site called Syndicate that was a directory of RSS feeds and blogs, and that was something I'd done in my own free time. It was a gigantic pile of MySQL and PHP. So that was actually like a personal project I did for quite a while. So I had a good understanding of the value of blogs. Now, at the point when I'm working with Andy, I'm reviewing all of his narrative documents, and we're looking at them, and then suddenly seeing, okay, here's the business plan. It says we're getting this many engineers, we're going to have this kind of a dev team, and we're going to compute and database and networking. So I'm kind of starting to see that this is going to be a really big deal. Now, at this point, I'm the only evangelist, and I'm going all over the world, and I'm speaking to lots of events, and I'm pretty much at the limit of how much I can scale. My family was really young at the time. There was not, and it was just me. And I'm looking at the plan, and I realize we're pretty much just hiring more developers. We're not at the point where we need a sales team, a marketing team. So I'm thinking, just kind of me to go out and really publicize all this. And thinking in terms of scale, I went to Andy and to our PR team, and I said, the next way for me to grow my effort is not to go out and travel more and just be on the road permanently. Let me share this all online. And so after a lot of discussion and back and forth, it was November of 2004. I wrote my first blog post that welcome, here we are. So in November, so 2 more months, we will hit 15 years. And I'm at somewhere around 3,200 blog posts.
Wow.
And maybe 2 million words, some crazy number like that. So.
Wow. Yeah, I remember every time that Reinvent comes, you are always like getting busy. I imagine that you are always. How does that interaction work? Do you work with the team closely? Did they invite you to like explain you to the product before that, or how does that work?
Great question.
I was always curious about
so things have gotten more and more organized over time. For probably the first 10 years, all of the blog management happened in my inbox, which was a really difficult thing to do. So it was just me. There was no team.
Yeah.
It was just me writing blog posts. And every team that would come to me, I'd say, sure, I'll write a blog post for this, I'll do this. And at a certain point, I was running out of personal scale. So luckily, we did some hiring. We brought in the first person, and she said, okay, let me kind of protect Jeff from the rest of the company. So she did things like she put in a ticketing system so that when teams need a blog post, they create a ticket, and then we actually, and so we went from kind of total chaos of just my inbox to now having a really nice team that really helps me to organize, and then luckily it's not just me writing blog posts anymore. We've gone from simply me, now we have, I think we have a total of 6 people that are writing for the main AWS blog. So the basic process, so I mentioned the narrative documents that we use within AWS to define a new business. Yeah. When we're defining a new service or a product launch, we use another document, it's kind of a funny name, it's called a PRFAQ. So the PR is press release, and FAQ is frequently asked questions. Okay. So the idea when you are defining something new that you would like to launch at AWS, you write this document, and we abbreviate it PRFAQ. So you write a press release, and now this is before you have defined your architecture, before you've hired a team, before you've written any code. You write a press release that says, Amazon Service is proud to announce such and such. And the idea is it's called start from the customer and work backward. You basically start from the press release, and it turns out it's very, very hard in the space of the really few lines of text you have in a press release to fully define anything that you'd like to launch. So writing a press release is a pretty difficult challenge. So the teams write the press release, and then all of the questions that come up as they're defining their product, they put into the frequently asked questions list. So the combined document is called PRFAQ. There's no way to pronounce it. It is PRFAQ is the best you can come from that. So the standard operating process, when a team would like a blog post from us, they create a ticket, they hand us their PRFAQ, and they also give us internal access to the service, which we call whitelisting, kind of a weird word, but they call it whitelisting, given access to the service. So we take these tickets, we kind of go through the team, we decide which ones we'd each like to work on based on our interests and based on our skills. Mm-hmm. And we always write the blog post from personal access to the service. We love all the service teams, we think they're the greatest people in the world, but we don't believe a word that they say. We always have to actually use the service for ourselves. Now, we find that having our name at the bottom of the post and making sure that it's our personal experience is the only way that we can be really just genuine and authentic in what it is that we write. So we always insist on direct access to the service. Now, it gets really interesting sometimes when it might be kind of an enterprise service. And you say, well, you need a corporate network, and you need a data center, and you need these different kind of things. We don't generally have those kind of things. So we have to kind of imagine a little bit, but to the best extent possible, we always want to get direct hands-on experience with the service. Now, that means we can write a blog post that's very accurate. And now it also means that we're really one of the first customers for that service. We get to see it when it's not quite finished. We get to give the team a lot of feedback. We get to say, well, this part could be a little bit better. Maybe this part could work a little bit differently. And so we get to really participate in the product development process.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that if you have ever found a bug.
Every time.
So you're like the final tester of
the teams absolutely for sure have a formal process, but now, the thing that is very difficult is, when you're looking at like a screen or a console, you've seen it so many times when you're the developer that you get almost this kind of blindness to it. And the most obvious things are not obvious to you anymore when you've seen it, and you're so tired of seeing it by the time you're ready to launch. So one thing that we say, we get to bring a fresh set of eyes to that. And especially we help with things like, a lot of times error messages. Error messages are, when you're writing a lot of text, that's easy. When you need to take something complicated and make it like 3 words, 4 words as an error message, that's a lot harder. So sometimes we also help the teams to clean up the error messages. And we have this Amazon leadership principle called earning trust. And so earning trust also means that when we tell the teams that here's something that could be changed or improved or be different, they trust us as bloggers that we're representing the best interests of the customers to make these things as good as possible.
And what was I don't know if anyone knows here, what was the first AWS service?
Good question. Oh, we got, oh, that's absolutely correct, yeah.
So how was that?
I'll bet all those people passed their certs, yes.
So how was reading that first service? Because it was the
Yeah.
first blog post that it was
So
going to be.
the process has evolved a lot over time. So I don't remember that there actually was a PRFAQ for SQS. And one of the interesting things that we'll do at Amazon is when we launch something, when we go into a new business, sometimes you kind of take a step into the future and the world looks at you a little bit funny, like, why are you doing this, okay? Now, at the point when we launched SQS, that was the first web service that we published, the first infrastructure service, and most of the world thought of Amazon as their bookstore. Now, most bookstores don't publish message queuing services, right? Kind of a weird thing to do. But we're okay. We were okay simply putting it out, and if you look at that original blog post, it's kind of the style that I started with a style. Here's what it is, here's what it does, how you can use it, here's some pricing, here's some ideas for what you could do it for. But we didn't really announce a bigger picture, right? At the time that we launched SQS, work was well underway for S3, work was underway for EC2, designs were already in the works for things past that. We could have easily said, well, we're about to do all these different things in the cloud and stay tuned and let's make a big splash. But we were okay simply saying, here's message queuing. We really hope you find it useful. If people were kind of mystified by that, that's okay. We're okay with that little bit of kind of mystery. We wouldn't create it intentionally, but we're okay if people are kind of wondering, what's the point of this? Why are they doing it?
Got it. And did that post help to bring new developers?
It actually did. People looked, and the really sharp people, the ones that were building scalable systems and distributed systems, they said, oh, of course, a message queue is this fundamental element. If we want to have asynchronous compute elements, and we want to do some work here and some work here at a different speed, what you can connect those pieces with is a message queue. Yeah. And the really smart people said, something interesting is up at Amazon. We better keep our eyes on this. So we did that. We followed it up with S3 and then EC2, and everybody's like, something interesting is happening here.
Okay, cool. And what has been the most challenging post that you have?
Let's see, the most challenging. I end up kind of stretching myself in a different way for each one, and I always want to make sure I'm kind of fresh. I don't want to kind of use the same words and the same thought patterns every time. Right. I remember kind of when we launched Lambda. Lambda was a really big deal, and like this was there was the word serverless didn't exist, I think, when we launched Lambda, and kind of describing that in a way that people would find it useful. And I think a lot of different posts just kind of their own unique challenges. I still think back to the S3 post and the EC2 post and saying, if we only knew back then just how big this was going to grow. We certainly had great expectations for these services, but to think that they would grow into a business that's multiple tens of billions of dollars per year was still like, wow, this is a big thing. This is a really big thing. And you look at the numbers for S3, that S3 is now many tens of trillions of objects. That's a huge number. Yeah. That's a number that's just so hard to even fit in your brain. Yeah. Like trillions is a hard number to kind of understand. And the amazing thing is when I talk to teams inside the company, like there are now different services that process quadrillions of items. Like they're like internal kinds of data is numbered in the quadrillions, which is an even harder thing to really get your brain to understand in some way. So these are kind of the fun scaling challenges, is when you think about a service that might deal with, I don't know, let's say 1 trillion requests per day. And you say, well, it's very, very reliable. It only breaks down 1 in a billion times. Well, if it's only 1 in a billion, it's still going to fail 1,000 times per day. So you start to think at these extreme scales, just what the numbers tell you as far as what reliability really has to mean.
Got it. Okay.
So coming back a little bit to what you asked me before about reInvent. So the first probably, I guess, 5 reInvents, I wrote all the posts by myself. And to a crazy level where the last one I did everything myself. I think I wrote 35 posts in 6 weeks. So it was an utterly insane amount of content. My wife, who's just sitting right there, she's very, very understanding, very, very understanding, and just knows that it's just kind of like peak time for me. But at a certain point, it was like, there's just too much for me to do by myself. And so we've brought in some more bloggers, and we've got a great team that's now helping. And the idea is that this year, it should be hard work, but it shouldn't be just kind of like the point of just 8 weeks of just 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day.
This time, 5 years ago, you wouldn't dream about going somewhere.
Probably not. No. There's always kind of a last point. So one of the kind of traditions within the company is that there's on whiteboards all over the company, you'll see N days to reinvent. And the last one I saw was 100 days to reinvent. But that was before I left. So I'm going to get back, and it's going to be 80-something days to reinvent, which first sounds like a really big number, but it's actually a really small number. Like the thing is that 80 days, if you mess up one day, you've like lost like 1% of your time. If you just something gets in your way, you lose 1% of your time. That's a big loss. Wow. So we start early. We have all the teams are going to brief us. Actually, the week of the 25th, I think. All the teams are going to get together. We do this fun event we call speed storming. And every team comes in for about an hour, and they bring their documents, and they say, this is what we plan to launch. And they say, we got these services, and we ask them a lot of questions, and we also try to kind of judge how serious they are. You can kind of tell, right? You ask really hard questions about what about this and what about that, and the teams that are just rock solid, they're like, okay, it does this and this and this. The teams were like, good question, and we'll get back to you on that. And we're still thinking about that. That's the indication that says, well, we'll kind of put you in the second pile. And we kind of take little bets inside the team of who's really going to make it or not.
Got it. So is the team giving you the docs? Or
yeah, the teams give us the PR FAQ. They give us access to the service. But the amazing thing is that in the time to reinvent, we're still figuring out the actual name of the product, the pricing model, the list of regions it's going to launch, the set of features that we're going to finally have. So a lot of things are just going to be changing up until the last minute. Okay. And you have to condition yourself to always say, okay, I know that I'm standing on sand and everything is soft and I might fall under at any minute. So in order to save yourself, what you always do, you find something stable, and of 50 things that are unstable, here's one thing that's somewhat stable. I can just kind of put my arms around that, and I can go from there. And then as you're working on that one, maybe the next thing solidifies and the next thing, and that's the only way you can really make any progress. If you say, I know nothing and everything's broken, you have no basis to get started, but you find that one simple thing that you can actually do and get finished, and then just take it and you move forward from there.
Got it. And how is that related to the reinvent announcement? Because I imagine that you have to have the product ready, the testing ready, the blog post ready, the documentation ready. How is that related? Like, we don't have the blog post yet. How is that?
So the goal that we have within the team is that we never ever, as a blogging team, we don't want to ever be the blocker for the launch. Okay. So we're going to do our job as best as we can based on what they give us. And if the thing is, every other team, like there's a whole set of developers that are building the product, that are testing, that are writing documentation, and there's just this one kind of small group of bloggers that are doing all the blog posts. But we're very dedicated, we're experienced, we're all really intense. We're going to make sure that there are blog posts for all these services. We're never going to be the ones that they're waiting on. Now, one of my kind of personal techniques is that when I'm deeply involved in the blog post for a service, so I'll start the day and I'll look at any feedback that came in the night before. I'll read all the feedback. I'll write a fresh draft. I'll send it out. I want that team to think that I'm working only for them. So, but there might be 12 teams that want to kind of think the same thing. So, but for that 8 weeks or so before reInvent, all those teams think that I'm totally at their service and that they're getting immediate response to all their feedback. So they send me some feedback. Okay, the next logical point in my work, I'm going to take the feedback, process it, write a fresh draft, send it over to them. So I'm just kind of running at my speed versus running at their speed.
And I imagine that you are pretty busy on these days and maybe over the year. So how do you manage work-life balance? And if you can give us any advice
Good. So I tend to, we have this phrase at Amazon we call work-life harmony. So work-life harmony means that you try to keep all the different parts of your life kind of moving ahead together. So I tend to keep myself organized with a to-do list that I start in the morning. And the fun thing is I don't have like a work to-do list and everything else to-do list. Like the first item on my list might be clean up all the email. The second might be like walk the dog. And the third one would be write a blog post and water the garden. And I kind of try to keep it all kind of meshed together. And I find that having one comprehensive list really makes sure that I'm not ignoring something. Like you can't, and I tell every new Amazon employee this. I say, you have to find a way that all your parts are moving forward simultaneously. You can't say, well, I'll feed my dog next month after. That just doesn't seem to work, right? You can't water your plants 2 months from now and expect anything good to happen. So you have to make sure that all the different parts of your life are just kind of moving forward and all getting whatever attention or care that they have at the same time. And so, and one of the things you'll find that Amazon kind of has there's a reputation that people work too hard at Amazon, that people kind of pile on too much work. The thing that is not always shared is you always have the responsibility to simply go to your manager and say, you've given me all these things, you've given me 5 things, I only can do 3. Let's figure out together which 3 I'm going to do a good job at. And that's one of the keys that people really have to figure out to succeed, not just Amazon, but any high-pressure job. You have to really have a great manager and just go to your manager and say, your manager is not going to know you're too busy until you tell them. So you need to have to actually give them that feedback and say, you've given me 5 great projects. I can do a wonderful job on 3 of them. Yeah. What would you like to do with these other 2? Sure. And that's one of the hardest lessons I think that new employees have to learn is this ability to escalate and use your manager to help you out to succeed.
So we've been talking about the evolution of how it's training for AWS, reinvent, but you also had a presentation today that we changed the dynamic here.
This has been far more fun than my presentation.
Okay.
So
we're going to have some time for you to ask questions as well. Mm-hmm. So, but why don't you tell us about what you have prepared, like the journey to the cloud, how has that changed from your perspective, from your blogger perspective, in maybe not just in AWS, but in the industry? What are your thoughts?
Let's see. So the thing that I'm really excited about with the cloud is that on day 1 when we launch a new service, people find that service right away, and we get immediate use. The day 1, the first 24-hour cycle of usage of a new service is actually significant. You know, and teams know this now, that when you build a service and you put it out for public use, you have to be ready for effectively any level of scale on day 1. You can't put it out and then say, well, this is kind of our trial, and we'll build scalability later. Yeah. You have to make sure on the moment that you launch, you're effectively inviting the entire world to come in and use that service. And this is a lesson every team has to really take to heart and say, you've got that one opportunity to just do it right and make sure that you're ready for that level of scale. Now, because everything is APIs, teams take advantage of the fact that they might put an initial implementation out. Maybe they do a kind of they'll do an implementation that is quick to do, that maybe they know that they can improve the efficiency later. Mm-hmm. And like I said, teams at Amazon are very, very, they're comfortable taking something that works, smashing it into pieces, and putting it together better later, and then migrating the customers to newer versions internally. The customers never know, except things get better and better and better over time. So there's this kind of really neat thing where when you're running a service at scale, you can start watching metrics, you can watch trends, you can watch analytics. You can be an actual data scientist on these numbers and say, what is this telling me about how customers are using my service? What are distributions of usage patterns, of data sizes? Did I think that most of the objects are going to be like this size, but they're actually this size? Can I maybe handle small objects, medium objects, and big objects differently? All this data science really comes into play at the millions, billions, trillions. You can have a great effect, and you can really, while thoroughly preserving all customer privacy, you can also have this opportunity to look at usage patterns and use that to help you to make the service better and better and better over time.
Sure, that's awesome. So, anyone else would like to ask any questions?
Shall we go? I mean,
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Have fun. My question is, for example, when I was learning about AWS and cloud, one of the most beautiful things I think of AWS is the big effort here was just evangelization of cloud, not just say AWS. Nowadays, we have other competitors, other cloud providers saying, come with me because I am the best. The more beautiful thing of AWS was like cloud, and then, but AWS, but was the small part of all the paper. Who decided that?
Good question. So the thinking that we always have, so we have 14 different Amazon leadership principles that and they're public principles that you can actually find online and you can read and understand those. But the first principle is called customer obsession. So the idea is that whatever we do, we're thinking more toward customers than toward ourselves. We're thinking, who are the customers and how do we satisfy the customer needs? So that would really say that our job is more to educate customers than to sell to customers. And you'll see that really just kind of informs all the different activities we do within marketing. It's all about education. It's all about making sure that our customers have a detailed, accurate understanding of what it is that we do.
so maybe we should go there.
Yeah, come on over.
Si alguien tiene preguntas en español porque no sé si está cómodo en inglés, siéntanse libre también.
El año que viene a lo mejor vuelvo, pero no.
My first question is, SimpleDB. SimpleDB was like before DynamoDB. And how do you do a product?
Okay, great question. So the actual answer is still available to use.
Yeah, I know.
It's never actually been taken offline. Whenever we launch a new service, the expectation is that these are infrastructure services, they are foundational services. We're very, very comfortable thinking that when we launch something new, it's effectively, we're making a very, very long-term commitment to you and to other developers, that we're giving you something for the long term. Now, sometimes you build something and you realize that the world has understanding the world at the time was not what it should have been. And it turns out SimpleDB was, I wouldn't say too simple, but it was this idea that you had every piece of data you put into SimpleDB, it actually fully indexed every column of that data. Wonderful simplicity for simplicity, but very, very high overhead as far as the amount of storage, the amount of compute power it took to do that. And all of that extra storage, all that compute power really effectively increased our cost, which increased your cost to use the service. So you can kind of think of SimpleDB as the generation before DynamoDB. We learned a lot from doing that. We said, well, let's give customers more control over indexing. And of course, SimpleDB also has some pretty small limitations on overall scale. I think it's like 10 gigabytes for the entire service.
I think the last time we were using that was in 2009.
There are still customers that are building new applications with it, and we're our best to say, if you want to, you can. Here are a lot of modern alternatives. When we do have to do some kind of a deprecation, we're very careful. We do deprecation S3 permissions, and work with the team to say, let's kind of make a very, very careful, a detailed announcement, and let's just kind of slowly kind of wind down the way we do things and make sure the time, give them a lot of details, we give them tools. I think it's something we take very, very seriously. When we offer something new to customers, if we have to make a change, let's be our best to be as open and direct and honest about the change or when we actually launch the service.
Yeah, that's what you did with the instance IDs.
That's right,
you
exactly.
Gave us like 1.5 years changing that.
We went from the short, the 32 instance IDs to 64-bit IDs, and we announced it. We gave you the ability to opt in per region and per account. We gave you testing tools. We gave you lots of warnings. We gave you feedback. And then ultimately we said, okay, everybody's tested successfully. We can now good.
Around VPCs. enterprise and other customers that were really afraid of using Amazon to start thinking about Amazon for enterprise and
Yeah.
Amazon Web Services. Wasn't this, I mean, how do you got there? You know, it was designed before time in place to accomplish that, because when we started it was the same space for everyone. For the people that were started using Amazon 4 years before, wow, we need to relearn everything again. So that's something that you had in mind for a long time, or?
So originally the whole VPC concept was optional, right? There was, you could actually run without VPC. So the original EC2, you had your own effectively flat network, and there were no subnets. You simply had availability zones. And the customer said, we want more control over our networking. We want our own address space. We want to be able to subdivide address space. We'd like the ability to really kind of run our cloud network as kind of with some of the same logic that we use to run our on-premises network. Yeah. Now the trick that we did, and I think this is one of our kind of best migrations, we managed to actually get all of the existing customers to get a free default VPC that was around what they already did. It was clean and transparent to those customers. They didn't have to learn anything new in order to do it, and they didn't have to make any changes, do any upgrades. That default VPC kind of just appeared around their existing instances.
Unless you try to delete the default VPC and you had to call support.
Yes.
You had to delete it for some services.
We try really hard, but sometimes there's always something we can do better. We are very, very aware that there's always something that we can do better. Now, we do a lot of math inside Amazon, an amazing amount of math. Get the plans to do something. We're doing this, and we're going to, this change, parent, 8 customers, and here's the list, and we're going to reach out individually to each one of these customers and help them with their migration. But there's a very strong effort to make sure that whenever we make a change like that, that we understand the level, just what the impact might be from that change.
I also remember when, I think it was 2010.
You have a great, by the way.
Yeah. For some things, I think
You guys suffer a lot of.
Yeah. No, the question is, at some point in 2014, you know, it was this myth that Amazon was giving spare compute power.
Oh, that
for
myth,
Amazon Web
yeah.
Services. And a lot of people actually believe that. I don't know if you remember that Amazon estaba usando capacidad no usada para Amazon Web Services. Can you explain the truth behind what was happening there?
Okay, so the original, this is one of the interesting situations where sometimes the world misunderstands and we don't go in and correct the misunderstanding. In this particular one, I think it would have been really better for us to go and say that EC2 is not some kind of capacity issue for AWS, for Amazon. So everybody knows that with Amazon, we have this kind of historic time where right before every holiday shopping season, we had to scale up like 30 or 40%, and then right after that, we kind of scale down and then kind of grow back up into that usage. And so early in the history of EC2, people started saying, well, the only reason Amazon did up that extra capacity. We should have just said, nope, that's really not the case. But we kind of let that kind of story just kind of be there too long. And it's never been the case. I can remember those original documents, and the original document about let's give compute power to developers. Oh, we have some extra servers laying around. What can we do with them, right? You don't make a business out of a couple extra servers. You really have the amount of engineering effort required to build EC2 was far more extensive than simply, oh, here's some extra servers, let's give people some kind of access to them.
But I remember the time that, I think it was 2014, that it felt like Amazon was trying to change this. You know, they were trying to explain, no, this is not spare capacity.
I think we've tried to explain a lot of times, and let me just bring up one slide just to kind of show what that really means in practice now. Let's see, where is this one? Where is it? Okay, here we go. Okay, so here are the metrics for, we can all step aside. This is This is Amazon Prime Day. These are the kind of metrics that we drive through AWS. So DynamoDB, 7.11 trillion API calls, and 45 million requests per second. Now, EC2, the Amazon team uses this thing called server equivalents because they use a lot of different instance types. But they went from 372,000 server equivalents up to 426,000. On the Aurora side, they ran 1,900 databases, 148 billion transactions, and then 609 terabytes of stored data. Then EBS. Before Prime Day, they added 63 petabytes of storage. They processed over 2 trillion requests a day, and they transferred 185 petabytes per day. So this is simply one AWS customer, effectively. So think of all this activity happening within AWS, but this is just one customer's use of a big customer, to be sure, but maybe, is it the biggest? I don't even know if this is the biggest use of AWS. So all of this power, 175 million items sold in the space of Prime Day. So this is what one customer's use of AWS can scale to now. Hide that one away. All right, other good questions?
Thank you for being here, Jeff. Of course, AWS is currently the indisputable leader in public cloud. But more and more we are seeing that other competitors are, of course, growing in the business. In your opinion, what could be the key differentiator service that AWS will launch or has already launched?
Okay.
I don't want to disclose
Sure.
anything that confidential, but what do you think
Okay.
from the existing services, what is really making the difference against the
So I get this question a lot, and to me it's actually probably not a particular service. It's probably more how we work with our customers. So again, going back to our customer obsession leadership principle, one of the things, besides blogging, which is about probably 80% of my time, one of the other things I do is I meet with a lot of our customers that come to Seattle. We have a session we call an executive briefing center. So our customers come to Seattle for either 1 full day or 2 full days worth of meetings. And the first session that we set them up with is called the voice of the customer. We give our customers time to prepare a presentation that says, this is who we are, this is how we're using AWS, these are our kind of goals that we'd have for the future, these are the businesses we might like to enter, and these are the requirements that we would place on AWS. And the attendees at that session would be basically the general managers of storage and compute and database and machine learning. All the leaders of the teams are there to listen and learn from the customers. And the general model that any one of those, let's say you're running DynamoDB. You own DynamoDB. Your job is to make sure that about 90% of your product roadmap, all the new features you're adding to DynamoDB, 90% of that should be based on all the things you learned from meeting with your customers. Now, we don't have an exact system that measures that's 90 and not 89 or 91, but the idea is that you as the general manager, you're responsible for knowing your customers and listening to and learning from them. Now, at the kind of bigger picture level, when I talk to these customers, usually we'll also have like a dinner afterward, they love the fact that we're listening to them, but they also say, well, because you're listening to so many different customers, the overall direction that the company's going in is going to kind of be where everybody needs to get to in this kind of summary of all the directions. It's kind of added up and say, okay, this is where the world needs to get to. So they will often tell me, they'll say, there isn't a specific thing that we need from you. We simply want to be receiving all the innovation that you're delivering for the other customers. So it's more the kind of that feedback loop of customers pushing the edge, coming to us and telling them what they'd like. We're delivering on it. That's kind of, if there's something that we're better at than anybody else, I really think it's going to be this customer obsession, this listening, learning, applying, delivering. Rather than, I mean, I could tell you, yes, it's serverless or database or ML. That's just the thing of the moment. But being an organization that really, truly wants to listen to customers, a lot of companies will tell you that, but at heart, they're kind of more technology driven. We are, as best we know how to be, we're customer driven.
Next one, come on cohorts.
I have a question. What is your advice about the vendor logging? Afraid when I start a project in a customer, try to explain that, okay, fight with the vendor logging, they're afraid about that. What is your recommendation?
So it does come up from time to time with customers that I speak to, and there's a lot of different levels that you can really approach the cloud at, right? You could actually, at the very simplest level, you could say, well, I'm only going to use the cloud in effectively a generic way. I'm going to just use I'm going to use all my open source databases. I'm just going to use my existing machine images and just kind of bring those in. Some customers are actually happy with that.
Yeah,
Now,
the problem is when you're talking about the high level here, for example, in Spain, the difference is the CTO is not understand well the difference to use CPD on premise and
Right.
the cloud. Okay. My question is about what is the it's advice or try to convince the bear to go to the.
okay. So one thing you can do is you can always contact your local friendly AWS folks, and they're going to be totally ready to help you. Ultimately, the customer wants to get something built and out to market as quickly as possible. So if they are going to have to build a lot of things from scratch, right? You can avoid lock-in by building your own really, really deep technology stack, or you can say, most of that stack is already available in the cloud for me, and I can simply use it. And if you're truly, like at some point you say, well, I've gotten locked in, I need to move, well, then at that point you say, let me actually see what pieces of what I consumed in the old cloud are available, not available in the new one. We're talking about things that might happen once every, 3, 5, 10 years. Now, to block yourself from all the innovation and to say, let's only use the cloud in a very kind of generic way, you're not going to benefit from all the great things it does. And I think that you have to really present that to your customer and say, we know how to build it generically, and you can pick it up and you can move it somewhere else on a moment's notice. However, it's going to take us a lot more work to do, and maybe you're not going to get the benefit of the cloud that you're doing. Now, the customers I talk to say, yes, at some point we could switch away. If it does, it's going to cost us some time and money to do it. Probably not a thing that we always have to have kind of a plan B that says if we have to do it, let's do it. They generally would say, if that's a concern, tell us the specific things that you're worried about. Like lock-in of data. Well, you can use any number of different open source and commercial databases on AWS. If you're worried about your code, well, pretty much any programming language you can think of is going to work there. So I would always kind of examine it at a little bit deeper level and kind of get a better understanding of what they're really, truly afraid of there. Now, there are certainly tools and layers and platform libraries that somehow claim to kind of like make this level that you were getting good benefit from doing that.
I have one question. You have explained about when you start on AWS, the working with Andy and defining what should be AWS. And now it's easy to answer, but when you started, which was your expectation about what you were drawing, you were thinking about at that point of time? Do you believe that will become something as it is today?
Well, probably not. No, not at all. It's very easy to look back on history. It's so easy to look back on history and say, I was highly confident this was going to be like the world's most amazing thing. It's so easy to do that. The reality is, it was my job, and we're doing the thing that we're doing, and we're making all these great plans for the future. And honestly, at the point when we started selling EC2 for 10 cents an hour, I'd like go out and travel. And I'd like travel, and you're traveling, you spend money, like eat a meal, and you're thinking, wow, I just had this meal, and that's like 300 hours worth of EC2 that just cost me my meal. And you're thinking, is this going to be like a good business or not? And you kind of start to think of everything in terms of those just initial pennies per hour prices. And it took some time to realize everything was, now being, sometimes the outside world knows that you're successful before you do internally. Like we were clearly doing great inside. And lots of people had access to the numbers, and you could see that things are growing really, really well. But you don't quite get the sense from what's happening inside the organization necessarily that's doing great. Now, where everything changed for me, I think, was the first reInvent. So before the first reInvent, we'd done a lot of smaller events, and we'd certainly gone out and we'd met lots of customers, and we'd done all kinds of presentations and startup events. But we said, okay, the first reInvent, we need to make this really special. We need to make sure that when people show up, it's just the best conference they've ever been to. And I absolutely remember walking into the first reInvent, and there are 6,000 chairs set up. And I'm kind of getting in there early, and there's like 6,000 empty chairs. And I'm like, oh, this is like a real thing, isn't it? Like it was a very profound moment for me, just kind of walking into that room the first time and realizing that people actually were going to show up to hear what we had to say. And that it's different when it's physical and in person. And there's just this big empty room just full of seats. And now the funny thing is that back then, that first reInvent, we had some announcements, and we were definitely going to launch some things. But now we have a very formal process, and underneath the reInvent, we have an entire room we call the war room. There's probably 60 people in there that every time Andy announces something, we have this entire pipeline of things that's, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this. And the first reInvent, we didn't have that. There was no actual marketing team. There was no war room. I was actually sitting in the audience on my laptop, okay? And Andy announced something, oh, click, 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 publish this. And then it's just amazing how much times have changed so quickly. Like the first one, I'm sitting there, I published the first one, and then I realize whoever's behind me can see what's on my screen for next. I'm like, okay, I'd better leave right now. And it kind of, in just such a small number of years, we've gone from, okay, I'm in the audience publishing from a laptop to this entire team of people making sure that when Andy says, okay, the new ABC is ready, that within seconds we have published the console, the documentation, the product page, the blog post, all the social media goes out. We have a huge team of people that are just hair trigger ready for, okay, Andy says it's there, and all these are just amazing dominoes just go right there to make it all happen. And
it was not in your mind when you started that?
Not at all, not at all. And we've as we get to each level of sophistication, it's okay, how do we deal with this? How do we manage it? And how do we make sure that we're ready to deal with this complexity and scale? But thinking back to those early days, how could you know? I mean, certainly we knew that like hosting was a great business, right? There were any number of hosting companies there. And I do remember kind of reading some of those first docs and saying, yeah, this could work. This could really, really work. And it wasn't quite clear. Now, only at the point when we launched SQS was it really clear when you say pay-as-you-go web service, like this idea that you create an account, you had account identifiers, and we'd actually like add up all the calls, and we'd actually create a bill for you. That was all kind of like, it's very obvious now. None of that was figured out before we launched that first service. So I think one of the lessons you take away from this is you have to build a technology. Everybody's saying, oh, you got to build that technology. But you have to actually also figure out how do you actually make a business around that? And you say, okay, well, we're doing this, and we're charging 0.000 something pennies for each one of these calls. And then, especially now with Lambda, it's like every call to Lambda is 0.00001 something. It's like, okay, this is like a microcent or a picocent or something. And it's like, you can actually make a business out of microcents and picocents if you do it right. So, a very interesting thing to learn.
What did you think about the multi-cloud?
I think I kind of answered that just a little bit earlier, but I really think that most customers are going to be served better by picking a cloud and really focusing their efforts on learning the cloud. Every one of the clouds that's out there is adding new services, adding new features very, very quickly. The idea that an organization of any size could attempt to keep up with and get great value from two or more of them, I think is going to be pretty challenging. When I speak to our largest customers, a customer the size of like a Netflix or an iRobot, they spend a lot of their time making sure that they understand fully every new service and every new feature that we launch. And these are big companies with big dev teams and the ability to even devote people to simply tracking what's new. When you say, could a smaller organization do that for 2 or 3 different clouds? Is that energy best put into spreading your resources thin over those clouds, or saying, okay, here's the one that works well for us, and let's just invest in that to the best extent possible?
One thing related to the previous question about lock-in, I think that sometimes people forget that, for example, identity and access management or cloud formation were created to solve something, and there was no other solution in place there. I mean, Amazon had to create that because there were no other tool to manage permissions or how to build infrastructure from scratch. So now, obviously, it seems like a threat, but there's I think it's not a master plan from Amazon. We are going to create this service to take them all to us. But I'm talking this from my experience working with customers more in a more traditional environment like Madrid.
Yeah, Madrid. Okay, I lived 2 years in the United States, and when I come from there, here, wow, I come to the past. Okay. I'm feeling that way, and
and how about outposts? Because that's
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking this because I really like the approach that to simplify the process, we are going to take care of everything. But how did Amazon came to that? In the Amazon way.
Right. Okay. So again, it goes back to customers. So for those who don't know, Outpost is actually a rack full of hardware designed, built, and shipped to you from Amazon. You'll be able to go to your console and say, I need this many racks full of hardware, and we will ship them to you. And you plug power, you plug in networking, and you will have your own rack full of cloud, basically. So you can run EC2. You'll be able to have a number of different services on that Outpost rack very, very quickly. Now, I kind of knew this was going to be a success when the first customer I shared it with, she looked at it and she's like, can you send me 100 racks right away? It's like, whoa, that's a good order. So this idea now that you can get your own hardware, and there are customers that say they need something that's very, very close to their existing like factory floor or warehouse or production line, that Outpost is going to be the right solution for them. And there's others that say, we already own a data center. We want to get the last 5 years worth of value out of our data center. So let's put some Outpost in there. Or they say, we need some kind of really interesting combination approach where we'll do some of the processing in some Outpost racks and we'll do the rest on the cloud. So I think we're giving customers some additional options there.
Is this like an evolution from Snowball and the edge processing there, or it was?
I think it's just, again, a reflection of this is what customers say that this would be a useful thing to have.
You know that Amazon's competitors already had some kind of software solution, but it was a hell to install.
Yes.
And I think the simplified approach that you don't need to take care for this. You're going to receive the hardware there is really.
Yeah, the idea, I think ultimately we said, for us to deliver a high quality solution to customers that we can actually stand behind, we need to control the hardware, and we need to define and control the hardware. And we've put a lot of energy into really low-level hardware. So if you've been following along, we have what's called the Nitro system. So Nitro system is from the point when you start up an EC2 instance. The Nitro system, it does security checks on the motherboard. It handles networking. It handles encryption. It handles certain aspects of VPC. It handles aspects of EBS processing. These are all handled by custom hardware. And so when you have an Outpost rack, you're getting the benefit of all that custom hardware development that we've done over the past years.
Do you like the solution?
I haven't actually had one yet, but it looks really, really great. Now this is, again, one of those situations where, as bloggers, it's going to be a challenge for us because we don't have data centers. We're not going to get a rack delivered to our house full of Outpost. We're going to have to probably go to some Amazon office and actually kind of pretend to be a customer with a data center to do it properly. But it clearly solves a really important problem for our customers, and really looking forward to seeing it hit production.
I have a question. There was recently a massive security breach in Capital One. More people are moving to the cloud. What role do you think Amazon has, if any, in securing these new workloads on the cloud? Increasingly more and more information people are not ready to deal with the complexity of securing their infrastructure?
Sure. So it's absolutely vital that we give all of our customers all the right tools to secure their data. And what we like to think of is that we're going to control the security of the cloud, and the customer is then responsible for the layers above that of the security of what they provide in the cloud. And now the line isn't as clean as you'd like it to be, and there's always ways to take different parts of AWS and set them up in different ways, right? We saw with S3 that people accidentally made buckets public sometimes when they didn't understand how to do that. We've made that a lot more clear, a lot more obvious. You can figure out how your buckets are, which buckets are public, which buckets are private. There is any number of different security tools that our customers should avail themselves of. As far as the specifics of Capital One, not something I can actually get into. That they are a customer. That'd be something to discuss with them more directly. Customers from over there? That's kind of been a quiet part of the room. And this side too.
Here we have a question.
Yeah, so you were talking before about Netflix, and it's saying that it's one of your best customers, and it's quite surprising because in the same way it's your competitor with Amazon Prime Video, and yet Amazon keeps innovating in other sectors. How do you feel customers perceive you like as threatened in some way because you're also investing in other sectors that are the same as theirs?
Really interesting question, and you'd probably have to want to talk to Netflix to get their perspective on it, but Netflix was an early adopter of AWS, and they certainly had their pick of any different kind of technology that they wanted, and ultimately they said, let's place our bet on AWS, and they've been a great customer. I think that AWS has let them do a lot of different things that they couldn't have done in any other way. For example, when any kind of a new hardware device is announced, Netflix is able to spin up a huge amount of compute power and re-encode all of their content in a very short amount of time to be ready for whatever new video format or device size is ready. And you look at the scale an organization like Netflix runs at and say this is something that they can only do in the cloud. They couldn't have done on premises. Now clearly, Amazon's a big company. We are doing a lot of different things. They're wholly separate businesses. They're different parts of Amazon. So the AWS runs, and we're trying to make AWS the best possible thing it can be. Prime Video, they're also trying to make themselves the best thing that they can be. There's never any interchanging of data. There's no way that, for example, Prime Video has any access to the operational metrics of AWS or anything like that. We're very, very careful within the organization that data is private to AWS and the account managers and so forth. So there's no sharing, there's no visibility of data or metrics or things like that.
Actually, they are in the reinvent even as they have a book in the reinvent activity. So fun. See them, they're like part of the whole event.
They are.
Yeah,
they send great speakers.
Netflix from Reinvent.
Yep, they send speakers. They've got a great open source model. They've open sourced quite a number of really interesting tools. They've really, I think, helped push the state of the art of AWS as well. Things like the whole chaos engineering model really originated with Netflix.
Actually, from the team of Netflix talking about chaos engineer, they really in the Reinvent. So I think that they are really comfortable.
Yeah.
Great.
Going back to the security breaches and data leaks and those issues, do you think, or how do you think you could help customers to protect their data?
Well, we have a lot of services. Okay, well, we have a lot of services that are already doing that. And for example, I know that we recently just started scanning, looking for open public buckets and sending customers information. If you have any public buckets, because I just got email just this week that said I've got a public bucket that's been open for quite some time because I have a website that's being served from that. So we're always looking to say, here's the next level of information that we can collect and share to customers. Now, we've given customers this machine with a lot of controls and knobs and switches. We're going to always do our best to say, this is how to use all these things in the most safe and secure way possible. But it is like any complicated machine. There are ways you can use it that are not as safe and secure. So we have various things that are going to be looking for misconfigurations, giving customers more information, various kinds of ways we can keep educating customers I think there's never too much we can teach people about security, right? And we're going to make sure that we continue to do that in every way possible.
Do you agree this is there is improvement? There are ways that you can improve, ways to help customers do it better?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. There's always a way to do things better. The challenge sometimes is that, especially when customers want to, it seems to me the root of some of these is that customer A wants to share something with a partner B, and someone says, oh, I'll just quickly make this thing public because nobody will know about it, right? And then they don't realize just when you make it public, just the full implications of doing something like that. So part of it's going to be more education and more warnings and more alerts to say this is the consequence of doing that, to make sure that they realize I was reading a forum yesterday on Hacker News, and someone said, oh, I always make all my databases public because no one's going to find them. It's like, really? Really? They thought that database authentication was a perfectly reasonable way to protect a publicly facing database, which was kind of shocking. And luckily, everybody else in the discussion said, don't do that in like 50 different ways. So education and then peer feedback, community feedback, also going to play a part there. I think we've exhausted all the questions.
Yeah, I think you're
Antes de la siguiente pregunta, solo decirles que nos quedan como 10 minutos, así que hagan su mejor pregunta ahora. Si no, no se merecen la cerveza o el refresco que pueden ahora. Así que, pregunta.
Yes, AWS Reinvent is very close right now. So my question is very simple. Do you have some prediction on what is next?
I have zero predictions, and so I haven't been briefed by any of the teams yet, so they haven't told me anything. Even if they did, history has told me that until the day of the launch, nothing that they tell me is actually the truth. And so you will be just as surprised as me at the point when we launch all of these amazing things. I will be briefed by the teams later this month, and so I'll have kind of an initial list, but we really actually like the element of surprise. So you probably notice that some companies are really good at kind of accidentally on purpose they'll leak details of what they're doing, and you kind of hear all these stories and rumors of what it might not be. We prefer to go from doesn't exist to you can use it right now, and that's to me one of the optimal way to get things to. Otherwise, there's always going to be a lot of guesses, a lot of, well, what about this, or how could this happen? We would simply prefer to hand it to you just finished and polished and available to start right there that morning of reInvent, just as soon as we launch it. And even if you gave me like a lot of beer, I still wouldn't know anything to share with you. So.
I thought that the question was about tickets, so this was easy.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask like two questions. They are a bit like broad, but okay. The first one is just, what do you think about the new competitors that are appearing worldwide that are appearing from the Eastern world, like Alibaba Cloud? They're growing very fast and they're offering other kind of products and services, and they are scaling in a couple of years in a very fast way. They're innovating in their way, and also they have the power to do some kind of things that probably other companies in the Western world, they are a bit more skeptic of. And then what do you think will be the role of a company as Amazon Web Services with all this new geopolitical situation that we are having in the world? I mean, a cloud is something that is built to give the support to companies in a local, in a global way. But now with the, let's call it like the new world order or what is happening or something, you think that it can be a breakdown or something at a point, or
Wow, okay, so the two hardest questions for last. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I think absolutely for sure there are a lot of companies that are now saying, wow, cloud is a great business. We should have an offer there. And I'd kind of like flip things around and say, this is probably one of the best times to ever be a developer, because you now have so many awesome things at your fingertips that you can pick and choose from multiple different clouds, each with this incredibly long list of services, and you can build really cool apps by taking these services and connecting them together. You can easily build applications that say, okay, I'll use some storage services from here and some compute from here, and I'll use some machine learning services from somewhere else. I don't think there's been a time in the past ever that you had so many different incredibly interesting things to capture your attention. So looking at it from that point of view, I can't think that this is like a great time to be a developer and an entrepreneur. Okay, that was the easier question. Let's see, geopolitical, probably way above my pay grade, as we say, kind of trying to understand that. We operate in a big, complicated world, and things change. I know that even the naming of regions, when let's say if England leaves the EU, then region names change, for example, and then various data sovereignty issues are going to arise, where you say, well, you need to keep data in the EU. Well, okay, well, now it's in the LHR region. It's not in the EU anymore. There's not going to be any shortage of interesting challenges for the developers, the customers, right? Because you're going to have to, we're going to do our absolute best to give you all the facilities to work well in that complicated world. But as far as like understanding the laws and making sure you keep your data where your customers need it to be, I think that's going to be probably just a consequence of this kind of dynamic world we suddenly find ourselves in, where things we thought were constants are actually suddenly variables, right? So, good question. Stay tuned, I guess might be the great answer for that.
I have more a question, a request for explanation. How Amazon keeps the contract with the customers, so because we know that we have the solutions architects, the technical evangelists, and everyone, but maybe the broader audience, they don't know how to reach if they want to ask for something. Maybe they think that they need to purchase or so.
Yeah.
Which are the channels that are open from Amazon?
Okay, really good questions. How do you actually get feedback to us? Okay, you can always email me if you email me. No, really. Any email that I receive that is something for a service team, I will make sure within some very small number of minutes, I will get that to the general manager of the service team directly. And I'm always happy to be that router. If you are able to go to reInvent, it's always a good idea to make contact. One of the primary reasons to go to reInvent would be to make some personal contacts on the different teams. If you go to a presentation about DynamoDB or EC2, meet all the AWS people in the audience, get their business cards, and then have an email conversation with them so that you can actually send them feedback. Every so often, I'll see a good thread on Reddit that someone will say, what EC2 features are you looking for? And I know that the teams watch those pretty carefully and use those as input to their planning process. You can do that. You can tweet at us. You can send us messages. You can write a long blog post that says, top 10 things that EC2 really needs, and make sure we get aware of it, and we'll make sure that we find it and pay some attention to it.
I will say that I was a witness of this because
I didn't pay him to do that, of course. But
when Amazon started to translate the dashboard, the console, to Spanish and other language, it was really bothering for me because I use my browser in English, but it was detecting that I am in Spain. So every time I was switching the page, so I went to Twitter and I say, hey chef, when are we going to fix this? The PM of the console appeared from the ground, and he said, hey, I'm here. Can we talk in the side or maybe exchange some emails? And they fixed this. This was like 10 minutes. I felt really bad because I was, oh shit, this guy is going to be...
No, we actually love those kind of interactions, so happy to help.
But it really works. I know I am not Spanish, but I have experience of being here, and I know that sometimes for Spanish people, they don't like to feel that they are jumping over someone or whatever, being there. They are open. I know that I'm somewhat biased to Amazon Web Services because I started with this cloud, but it works. So I think that maybe we can end the formal part of the...
So, yeah.
And we can go to drink something.
I just have a final question that...
Final question.
Is this harder than geopolitical? But
No,
okay.
it's an easy one. So, maybe...
Someone, question, please.
You're going to have time because we plan to go to have time with him. So
So we are struggling right now to find speakers, to find the community to come and speak here. So I would like you to invite them to maybe just motivate them.
Oh wow!
Because
Okay.
you were saying that being in a first meetup or being in a community group helped your career. So he's a really good example that this community works. So it's not just about going. This is a good example, is because it's not just about coming here, someone talking about like they're experts or about something. It is about more the community and have a conversation with everyone here. So do you have something to share with us?
Let's see. So most people are not too excited about getting up in front of an audience and speaking. It's not the scariest thing ever. It's really, really like, pick a topic, make sure you know it really well, and then come up and explain it. The reality is everybody in the audience actually wants you to succeed. No one's there hoping that you make a mistake or you get scared or something. Everybody in the audience is thinking, I could be that person up on stage, but luckily it's them and not me. So don't be fearful of just getting up on stage and sharing what it is that you know. Like pick some really interesting topic. The very act of preparing for it is the thing that's going to help you to learn and make sure that you know what it is. And the reality is when you're up and people ask you questions, you can always say, I have no idea what the answer to that is. It's okay to not know everything. That I think is maybe the hardest thing, but you think as a speaker, you must know the answer to every possible question coming up. Not even close. There are so many things I get asked that I say, you know what, that's a great question. We should Google that right away and figure out what the answer is. And there's plenty of things that I know nothing about. And being okay to not know everything, I think is just a really important part of being a speaker. And just be yourself, be direct. And it's okay, wonderful question. I don't know the answer. Let's figure it out. Or maybe somebody in the audience knows and kind of take it from there.
So, okay. Thank you. Jeff,
My pleasure.
Coming.
Thank you.
Afuera hay bebidas y un poquito de...
Hold it. Since everybody else gets pictures, I want a picture too. All right. Let's see if I get everybody here all at once. Oh, perfect. We'll go 1, 2, and 3. Awesome. Got you all.
Wait a second. Yes, we want to. Vamos a hacer una foto para todos. La hacemos fuera.